Flame on! How's everybody doing tonight? And I'm here with my special guest, Nick Lenz. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good.
And welcome to another episode of Anime Blaze.
It's been a while.
It's been a while. Man, it's been a while. It's been like, what, almost 4 months now?
Yeah, we've been all busy.
But all jokes aside, we're going to go ahead and get right into it. Jojo Bizarre Adventure Part 3. Now, out of this one, this has to be my favorite season so far, out of the ones we covered.
And a lot of good action. The fact that it's probably also, of all the parts they have for the anime, this is the longest at 48 episodes. Though they did split it up into two different cores, basically, where because of the way the story goes. Of course, we have the returning Joseph, which we saw him briefly at the end of part 2, where it's the older one, voiced by Doug Ertz, I think his name is. He's one. Believe it or not, he actually is actually the voice of the main villain of Bleach: 1,000-Year Blood War. Yurabaha. That's him.
Nice.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were surprised by the fact that he basically got the gig. I was hoping for one of two people to get that job. Bryan Cranston, though he might have experience, but he actually has experience in voice acting.
He does.
Another one, Steve Bloom.
Now, Steve Bloom could have pulled it off. I will agree with you on that. Steve Bloom definitely could have pulled it off.
I gotta admit, the guy, he even though they picked Doug Ertz basically to voice him, he does a really good job playing Yurabaha. Very good job. No complaints. And just this past Saturday, they just wrapped up part 3 of
1,000
Blood War. And according to rumor, part 4 is allegedly not coming out until next year.
Yes, I would agree. Now, for you, now Naruto Explained recently did a much more in-depth video about the animation and anime, the industry. So shout out to Naruto Explained. He'll go into much more detail what I'm about to say here. But noticeably, there's a lot of stuff got reshuffled, including those Naruto OVA episodes. And you have to factor production costs. You actually try to animate and draw and put them and structure them.
And it's also stuff that I've also heard that Black Clover might be making comeback, but not this year. And Bard's may come back, but not this year.
Best case scenario. Now, again, Naruto Explained goes into more detail in this video. Boruto will make a return in 2027, 2028 at the absolute earliest. Best case scenario. And even then, you're not going to get a continuation of the anime because you'll be right back in the same rut that you were. This is really one of two scenarios. Either adapt the Omnipotence arc as a movie, i.e. Demon Slayer Mugen Train, and adapt it that way, or go straight into Two Blue Vortex and then adapt the Omnipotence arc as a flashback.
Mm-hmm. That would have to stretch it out.
Because it's only 12 chapters. It's a slow burn, much like Yeah.
Black Clover, there's plenty of chapters that have been released since the anime ended to do their season. Plenty. There's been like over 100 chapters released. So anybody basically reading the manga and see where the anime left off, like there is no reason why the anime can't come back sooner for Black Clover. You would think they wrapped up part 3. Maybe they can start working on Black Clover. But no, we have to wait next year for it. As to how long the episodes are, I don't know. I would have basically put something out this year so we have something Black Clover related, but nothing. The last thing we was released was the movie. I still haven't seen the movie yet.
And I'm not going to spoil it for you because you haven't seen it. The movie is pretty good. I just feel like Black Clover is going to end up being a Full Metal Alchemist 2000, Full Metal Alchemist 03 situation to where they'll have to completely rebrand and reboot the anime.
I'm kind of hoping not.
Granted,
the fact that it's been a few years. I think in the case of Among Us, I think they waited what was like almost 10 years after the original anime before they did the reboot.
Yes, after the original manga ended, it was about 10 years, give or take.
Yeah, I think the anime was like 03-ish. I still have not seen the original anime yet, but
it goes off the rails quick, man. Just cut straight through Brotherhood. I highly recommend it. Just go to Brotherhood. You'll get a proper
Brotherhood. Brotherhood is awesome.
Brotherhood is awesome. Class act. But just don't.
It was actually, I think it was actually the first reboot anime that I've heard of where it actually went from start to finish. Now, of course, also Rama Half came back last year, and I was quite happy that came back because there was still a lot of manga that could have adapted. And I hear this part season 2 coming, don't know when. I was kind of shocked that NCN had there only 12 episodes the first season.
That is true.
Yes, but in the case of this one, well, we have Joseph arriving in Japan. Well, at the end of part 2, he just in Japan for a reason. It's revealed him at the start, which, okay, before we continue, this part has been adapted before as an OVA series in the 1990s. That got controversial in the Middle East due to the fact that Dio Brando was seen reading the Quran. Yes, seriously. An evil vampire reading the Quran, and people in the Middle East are hissy fit over that. When it was released over there. Well, I've seen the scene. It's okay. I don't know what the heck the Quran says, so I get the fact it's a Muslim Bible. Fine. According to the animators who basically made the scene, it was never stated to be the Quran. It was just basically a book written in Arabic. It's just that they thought it was the Quran. That's why they threw a hissy fit over it. This one, they do have that scene here, but I think it was clear he was not reading the Quran. He just reading some other book in Arabic. Because I didn't hear any complaints about that scene because that one got that. And also, this when it was originally adapted, they rushed this arc. Because, like, in the first episode, they basically skipped over a lot of stuff in that one. This one is a lot more, much more basic adaptation than that one was. So, he's called to Japan by his daughter, Holly, who at this point is his only offspring until we're happy with part 4, which we'll get to next time. So, then he's visiting the police precinct. And you're thinking, why the heck is he at a police precinct? Well, that's because our protagonist is in prison. And Jay, he is disappeared. Oh, there you are.
Sorry about that. I logged out for a second.
Yeah, so he's in a jail cell, and he kind of asked put there because something is weird going on, and like he gets something like a cigarette in his mouth, like he's something a gun, all this other stuff in his cell, and of course and then we're also introduced to Abdul, this big bulky Indian who, despite what you might think of it, he's not Joseph's servant. He is not his servant. He's just a friend who is basically also he is working with. You might think because of dialogue, he is basically acting like Joseph's servant. He is not. He is not going to be that way at all. He is his own man. And I shall also post something else. Something that wasn't probably in part 1 and 2. This one's probably here. The weird shoulder shapes. Did you notice this when you saw this part for the first time, Jahit? Where the shoulders, they look like they look like they're from action figures.
Yes, the designs definitely do become more frail and bulkier, kind of like akin to action figures. So I do agree with what you're saying on that.
It just looks weird.
It does.
Because in the first 2 parts, this was not an issue at all. They look like normal arms compared to this one. Now, those of you curious, does parts 4, 5, and 6 fix this? Yes. Yes, they do fix it. That is not their parts 4, 5, and 6. It's only here in this one part. It's a minor nitpick. So Abdul is asked to get Jotaro out of this jail cell. Now you see Jotaro, he's this big, tall guy who dresses in a school uniform because he's a high school student, obviously. And he is voiced by Matthew Mercer.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, man, I barely recognized him. But sorry about that, folks. I had a little bit of an echo going on.
Yeah, so people might recognize him as, oh, you mean the guy who plays Levi Ackerman from Attack on Titan? And Law from One Piece. Yep, same guy.
Yep.
And also the voice of Leon S. Kennedy for Resident Evil 6. And he also did for the CGI movies as well. He did the first 2 or 3, I think he did as Leon S. Kennedy. I haven't heard how he plays Leon S. Kennedy, but it's, and by the way, he does play the parts. He does play this character again when he shows up in the other parts. So it's the same guy all the way through. They did not change him at all. So then we're into something that the series is famous for. Finally here. The stands. Which we don't get an explanation where the heck these things come from until part 5. Abdul's is basically like a big bird, like a phoenix. Basically, he pulls him out of jail. And of course, we see also Jotro's, where his is basically like kind of like which. Oh, by the way, Matthew Mercer does voice the stand too. Okay, so all those that he does, that is Matthew Mercer. Yep. So he's brought out of the jail cell. He's like, I've accomplished what I want to do. So, and of course, Joseph himself has got a stand called Hermit Purple, which it's not a very good stand. It's mostly put used to take pictures. But there's no denying the fact the man keeps in shape for a man his age. I think Joseph, because as mentioned, it's been like 50 years since events of part 2. So I think he's
doing pretty well for his age, all things considered.
I think he's in his 60s at this point.
Yeah, he's about 60, 62.
Yeah. And the way he's dressed, it's like he's out of Indiana Jones because Indiana Jones was popular in the 80s. Because now we're in the 1980s, which means we're in the decade where the manga started. I think this one is actually set in. I think it's set in like about a couple years after the manga started. I think it's set in year like 87, 80. I think it is. But I think they mentioned when the year takes place because I believe in part 2 was 1937. Now we're in 1987. So we're brought out of the jail cell, and then of course they all leave. They go to the restaurant. Oh, by the way, before this, there is actually a scene. We have a fishing boat bringing up a box. And then the fishermen disappear. We found the box, says Dio. Dio Brando's back, except they don't use the name Brando. That's not here. For some reason, they dropped the last name. It's clearly Dio Brando. It's the same guy from part 1. Same guy, same voice actor, Patrick Stahl, who does an amazing job voicing the character. He does change his outfit for part 3 because he's in the 80s now. Gotta wear more 80s style clothing. And plus, he's a vampire, and he was found in the I think it was he was found near the Atlantic. I think he was, but somehow he ended up because the ship he was on sank in the Atlantic. But yeah, he ends up in Egypt for some strange reason. It's not really clear exactly why he ends up in Egypt. He just does. So he takes a picture with this Polaroid. And remember these things? I do.
Right.
Yeah, if you think some young viewers like, wait, what the heck is a Polaroid? It's basically automatic picture. You just snap picture. It's not like, ooh, I got my phone here. Snap, snap, snap. It's not like that at all.
No.
It's an actual device. You press a button, you look through a lens, and take a picture. And then there's a mini printer inside that comes out. I heard a story once. The reason the thing was created was because this kid wanted these pictures right away, but they didn't have technology. So the guy who invented Polaroid just invented it just because the kid wants to see his picture. So then we have him. We have Dio with his back. No, those who think, wait, I think it was a head in part 1. Well, it's kind of explained. And I know it's kind of gross talk about this, but so Dio removed Jonathan's head.
Yes.
And then he surgically attached his own head to Jonathan's body.
Yes,
So
this is
he
the
is
noir.
literally taking another man's body for a joyride. Some of you might be thinking, wait, this idea sounds familiar. Didn't it happen in comics? It did. In Spider-Man, when Dr. Octopus swapped bodies with Spider-Man, and it will become a spirit swarm. It's a very similar idea, but that does via technology. This is basically a guy's head.
It's magic. That's basically that's the simplest way to put it.
And those might be curious. Does Dios do the thing of, oh, let's put my fingers in your neck and suck out blood? Yeah, he still does that. So there's no change in him there. And so, of course, they have this little mosquito, which, oh, he's in Egypt. So then they have Joseph go to a school for the day because he has to go to school, where he runs into Kakari, who's got a pimple in his forehead. We'll explain a bit of this. Kakari is voiced by Kyle Herbert, which I think is when you listen to the voice, like, wait, that voice, yeah, it's Kyle Herbert basically doing his Gohan voice to play this character because, well, both are the same age.
It's pretty much his Gohan voice.
Yeah, and his stand is basically all about. It's a very weird stand of how the heck they explain it for his one. And also, they have a scene where Joseph just ends up in the school in the nurse's office. Which, by the way, in case you're curious, though, like the way the Japanese anime depicts nurses' offices in high schools, it is way different than the American one. Way different. When I was in elementary school, I actually did go to the nurse's office. It is a very small room compared to here, where it's like a freaking ball mini hospital. Oh yeah, I remember what it was built is. It's puppetry. I think it's his standard ability, puppetry. That's not good. That's what it was. And then apparently he uses to control the nurse, which I've heard the nurse is voiced by Wendy Lee. Who apparently, while she's being controlled, it's like she's basically almost getting undressed. Like she's basically losing her top. Well, don't worry, she's not going naked. Don't worry about that. It's a very weird thing, and then Joseph knocks her out because he doesn't want to harm her. She's only seen for the one episode, never seen again. And also, and the thing with Jojo is the ladies love him. Ladies love Jojo because how handsome he is. And apparently he's got so many fangirls. He tells them, like, oh, be quiet. Because he finds it kind of annoying because he's a loner. I'm like, dude, you have all these beautiful women basically who want to be your girlfriend and you tell them no? What is wrong with you? Right? And of course they do fight him. And then they reveal, oh, he has basically a little thing in his forehead. They pull it out. He's perfectly fine. Yeah, they explain the whole pimple thing. That's actually a control thing created by Dio. It's something with flesh. It's really kind of gross. Of course, they have other characters go the same thing too. We'll get to him. So he ends up basically like coming to their side, and they agreed to leave the country to go after him. So they basically charter a jet to fly out there. Well, that's a regular commercial jet, by the way. First time we actually see commercial jets in this franchise. And those of you curious, do we see this in any of the parts besides this one? We kind of see this in part 5, but we do see this in part 5. We see jets, but mostly put part 5 doesn't leave Japan. It doesn't necessarily leave the country. It does go. I don't know. We'll get to that later. So they fly in the plane. There's a stand there, and of course they have to land. I think it was in India. I think actually they go to Hong Kong. Because basically this part is all globetrotting. And then they charter a ship, which apparently is paid for by Joseph because he's rich. They do explain that after part 2, he became a real estate agent. And that's where he got some money from. Selling real estate. Which, yeah, from what I've heard, people can get rich from selling real estate. It's perfectly legal to do.
It's sleazy, but it's legal.
Yes, I think it was. I think it was at this part here where you're introduced to Ponref, the French swordsman, who's also possessed by Dio Brando. What to do for him? And they find the thing actually in his inside of his hair. And this whole thing is like, I have to look for the guy with two left hands because this guy killed his sister, which sounds like basically the guy from Princess Bride. And of course, while they're there, they run into this 12-year-old girl named Anne who's got a crush on Jotaro. And yes, she does have the action figure shoulders. A 12-year-old girl, mind you. So she sneaks on board the ship because she wants to go to another place. So then they leave the boat they're on. They go onto this big cargo ship. And the place is deserted. So Anna proceeds to take a shower. And then she's interrupted by a freaking monkey. And apparently the ship is a stand. So weird. A monkey. Which, of course, Jotaro basically beats the crap out of this monkey. Who works for Dio, by the way.
And quick segment here, quick segment. If you're worried about the numbering and why we cut straight to part 3, the original JoJo Bizarre Adventure is only 13 episodes. So in the previous episode of Anime Blaze, we just did part 1 and 2 together because part 1 was so short.
Yeah, part 1 is like 9 episodes, and part 2 is like, I think it's like 16, 17, I think it is.
16, 17 episodes, give or take.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if you're wondering why it's part 3 instead of part 2, that's why.
Mm-hmm.
Just in case that came up in the comment section. Please continue, Nick.
Yep. So they beat the monkey. They get off board. And then they arrive in India, which Abdul's from. And crazy stuff ensues. So it's basically now a 5-person team. So they basically also wandered to the desert for a while in India. They end up in a town, which at this town, they pretty much basically, it's like a modern day hotel with an escalator. There's also this weird thing where one of the stand users has this, oh, let's create this socket. Okay, so first let's have, I think it's like, they also, while they're there, oh, that's when Doc comes later, but, so they go to India, because that's where they go for the next stop, where they get to the next thing. Prior to this, Abdul gets killed off, but he comes back later. Poses his own father for some reason. We have a lot of stand users pop up here. Like, there's the Magnet Lady, who pops up later on when have Icky show up in this series. Which, he's voiced by Derek Stan Pierce. They have to show up at like the start of part 2 of the story, like basically second half, because a lot of this is basically follow them. We're also introduced to Ho Horse, who him and his girlfriend take on the group. The girlfriend die. I think she dies. He gets away. He goes to Egypt. One of like a couple times visit where Dio is, and he gets there, and there's a bunch of dead women in the house. In Dio's mansion. The reason because he finished basically doing his business with them and sucked their blood dry. Because he's a vampire. Of course he would do this. They also meet up with Darby the Gambler. A guy who gambles souls and puts them in chips. And Jotaro beats him by a really bad bluff. And all the and pretty much basically everyone's souls get lost and they of course get freed. And apparently Darby is named after a rapper. And this is basically they actually his brother that show up toward the end of this thing where apparently these two don't like each other. To the point where he accuses his brother of stealing his girlfriend. and stealing a bunch of other stuff from him because he's jealous of his brother. Except his thing is basically video games via NES when he shows up later on thing. And usually they name a lot of the characters after something related to rock and roll. Jojo Stan is known as Stardust Platinum. But a lot of the other ones basically came with the rock stars. So after, I believe it's prior to going to Egypt, Polnareff does find the guy who actually murdered his sister via this. His thing apparently is a thing to do with reflections. Yes, reflections. And after a few episodes, they do in fact beat him. They also were traveling on Jeep at this point, so they had to basically kind of use reflecting. So he does get killed, and of course, Polnareff avenges his death. There's also this old lady with Dio Brando. She actually plays a small role in part 4, and also a little bit in part 5. And she is the mother of the man with 2 left hands. Why the heck he has 2 left hands, I don't know. It's a weird concept related to this series. So, after they go to India, eventually they finally end up in Egypt at the end of part 1 of the first half of the season. And then they introduced Iggy, who apparently he loves his coffee gum. He loves his coffee gum. And also, he loves taking out Polnareff. Because there's a comedy gag between 2 of them. It's like, oh, let's have Iggy take off him and have Iggy basically on fine with Jojo very begrudgingly. He's one finds all reflection guy. So then they also send these 2 brothers after them. The other brother gets in. Apparently, it's like the other brother's like, oh, let's draw this stuff down. Apparently, this stuff become true. Apparently, and everything does, except that they have this weird moment where the brother can actually change his appearance, look like Jotaro, or basically right behind a freaking car, which is so funny. Absolutely hilarious. Also, they put like a bomb in fruit. And of course, also the older brother, he gets injured in this explosion, which was supposed to kill Jotaro. So they're in the hospital. The younger brother comes back later on, where Horus finds him and actually has him work with him. Horus is defeated, but he does not come back into a spin-off story. How the heck he survives is never really explained. Oh, and after leaving them, she does come back briefly, and then she still go back home. Because Jotaro told her to go. So then they arrive in Egypt. They arrive at his mansion. Of course, it's actually Iggy, the one finding the place, after battling Dio's bird, who's also a stand years like Iggy is. Was they had a conflict in the sewers. I don't know kind of abbreviating for this one, but basically it's like fighting stand users. There are some interesting ones. The magnet one where they're basically it's like, so Joseph and Abdul get affected by this by touching a socket, which is a no-no. So Joseph basically wakes up different direction next day, and there's like metal around him, including moving a desk. So it's like, wait, is the chair made of metal? I thought it was plastic. And then he runs
Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt you, Nick. I had to step out for a second, but please continue. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah. So he runs a lady, of course, she's like, ooh, he goes basically sound. He's like, no, I'm happily married. So how did they defeat the magnet lady? They basically run in 2 separate directions with the man behind them, and then they go around, and then they squish the lady. This beautiful woman. They squish her with metal, defeating her, supposedly killing her. I'm like, it's a very original way to be a villain, but okay. Because the whole thing is attraction. As for the old lady who works with Dio, they have basically finding this like deserted town where it's like people are acting really weird, and they find a hotel which she runs, and she her whole thing is she wants to kill Polnareff because he murdered her son. Despite the fact he killed her son because he killed the sister. So basically, it's like, you kill someone I know, I'll kill you, stuff like that. Which she's not much of a fighter. She doesn't get defeated by Polnareff. And at one point, like they have like, or it's a very weird set of episodes where they're actually at this hotel where it's not by a fog and they can't leave. After she's defeated, the fog disappears. So I'm like, wait, is the fog her stand? Because it's not really clear with that. So then when they finally arrive in Egypt, after Ig meets the bird, which he ends up finding the place, and like, oh, here it is. So they walk in, deal with the guard dog in front, and let's meet Darby the Younger, who actually levitates. You see this? Did you see this, Jay? Where he was levitating?
Yeah.
I'm like, how the heck is he levitating? It's just so weird. And no, that's not his stand ability. His stand ability is not allowed him to levitate. He just can levitate for some reason. And they go to a room where we had to play video games. And then, of course, basically like, so, okay, so pick this game. And like, ooh, I'll win this game. Like for Jotaro, he picks baseball. Well, things like, first is a racing game, which Polnareff picks. And then, by the way, Kokiri, he gets injured prior to this. And by having his eyes scratched out. Nearly scratched. He nearly is blind. But he's able to recover. And, well, then, of course, he does lose, though. In the case of Jotaro, he does kind of, like, beat him by bunting the ball a lot. And apparently he can also, like, read his mind. And it was like, oh, like, yes, yes, yes. No, no, no. And Joseph saying nothing. And there's a funny one where he's like, are you going to order me? He's like, yes, yes, yes. And he proceeds to beat the crap out of him in the most funniest way possible. It's like, okay. So after beat him, they split up into several groups. So you have Polnareff put Iggy on one floor. You have like Joseph basically by him, like basically everyone gets like several groups. And during the course of the battle in the mansion, Iggy is killed along with Abdul. And then of course when they fight Dio, they fight him on the streets. It's like a massive street fight. And apparently at one point he ends up stealing a senator's car. I'm like, wait, is he a senator for Egypt or United States? Because they're not really clear about that. And like, he even tells him basically get in the front seat and drive because the senator's waiting for his driver. So he threatens him by, I think he like broke his fingers. I think he did. And eventually he does drive. And like, oh, a traffic jam. He's like, drive up there. Because of course Dio has not used the cars in the 20th century. And of course, there's like, there's people up there. He's like, I don't care. Run them over. So then he proceeds to run the people on the sidewalk. And this senator, if he lived, he probably would have been charged with about 50 counts of murder. Well, the particular term is vehicular homicide. That's the legal term of this particular thing. Well, he was told to do this, and then he later died, and then Kakumi gets killed by finding out Dio's ability, and Dio's stand is known as the world, where he can freeze time for 10 seconds.
Hold on. The world! Oh. So I had to do the bit.
Yeah. Which, by the way, in case you're curious, though, when we get to part 5, there's going to be 2 stands that are very similar to the ones we see here.
This yeah. It's a wild ride. It's a wild ride.
Yeah. But at least they change locations when they do this. He hasn't been killed, but he's not dead yet. Don't worry. Polnareff survives, despite the fact he gets his foot chopped off in this fight with Dio. I think also because his arm injured too. I think he also loses part of his arm too.
I
And
forget this final battle is this was really gory. Part 3 is pretty gory now that I'm thinking about it.
yeah, at one point, so Jojo fakes being dead by having Stardust Platinum grab his heart to get it to stop beating. And opponent proceeds to buy him more time. And eventually Dio is defeated by Jojo, which is interesting. It's like, okay, so he is defeated by Jonathan's great-great-grandson.
Yes.
And so the head is destroyed finally, but there's a half body there. But we need to bring back Joseph. So how do we solve this? Blood transfusion. And of course, he thinks, oh, I'm Dio. And of course, he brings and starts like, prove me who you are. And he's like, my wife is Susie Q, and I love comic books.
Yeah, that's Jonathan.
Well, Joseph, anyways.
Yeah.
And then they burn his body, and ends up everything nice happen. No, it's not like the ending of part 2. We know where these people are. Polnareff, he does return after this in part 5. Excuse me, where he actually does play a role toward the end of it. In the case of, well, Kakyoin, I think his body's probably taken back to Japan. Holly, the reason why they leave to go to Japan really quickly from Japan to Egypt, because Holly was infected with a stand. It's a weird stand. By the way, Holly, if you're really curious how old this woman is, she's in her early 40s. And I look like, really? She's in her 40s? She looks really good for me in her 40s. And also her mom comes in, which they had this funny bit where, okay, they get a submarine. That's why they were in India. So they're in the submarine. So then, of course, you have Susie Q contacting them because that's how she gets the butler. And keeps Susie Q in the dark because she does not know what will happen with her only offspring, the daughter, Holly. So then, of course, like, okay, talk to Joseph. And then, of course, you have Joseph back on the phone. It's like, he's like, oh, hi. I know. I think he calls her grandma. I think he does. And she's like, Jotaro, what are you doing there? And he's like, oh, the old man and I go on vacation. I thought it would be so hilarious. I loved the submarine they had in the show. It was fantastic. And it was only one of 2 times ever in Jotaro they ever had a submarine. The other was in part 6.
Which we will get to. I mean, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. Part 5 and 6, they're a mess.
Yeah, but part 5 does explain where the heck the stands come from. They don't know what they start explaining this in part 4, but yeah, the explanation where the stands come from is like, really? That's where stands come from. Okay, but we'll talk about that when we talk about part 5. But I know this kind of abbreviated when I talk about when it comes to part 3. Part 3 is fun. Pure fun. And according to the writer, after this, basically, the characters got slimmer. Because his reason? End of the age of big bodybuilders type of protagonist. The era ended long after this.
Yes,
Which the character I've heard that actually was big and bulky, and I saw a video game, the main character of City Hunter, which I still haven't seen I've seen the anime yet for that one.
Yeah, the protagonist of City Hunter is one of the last few that still has that bulky late 70s, 80s aesthetic in terms of character design. The trend does die down by the time you get to the 90s. But by the time Jojo Bizarre Adventure originally debuted in 1987, you could see there was a transition era in the industry where the trend was starting to die out. So that makes sense.
And I always thought it was kind of weird they waited until 2012 to adapt this for an anime. Either it's because of the way the manga is, or because either the writer said no, or maybe I'm not sure what the reason was.
Apparently, now take this with a grain of salt because I could be wrong on this. Apparently, there was a previous attempt to adapt JoJo Bizarre Adventure like years ago, but it was so bad it literally derailed the IP for years.
Yeah, I think maybe it was the OVA series from '90. That could have been it, but we have no proof of that.
Exactly. Like I said, it's an alleged rumor. But needless to say, JoJo Part 3 out of the entire Joseph family or Joestar fam, excuse me. I want to say my favorite protagonist is, in terms of the whole overall series, my personal favorite is Josuke. But in terms of the main three, Jotaro was a close second. The only reason I'm not picking Joseph is because Joseph in part 2, he was an honest to God pervert. I just couldn't get behind it. And then his mentor ends up being his biological mother who gave him up. And then once you get to that reveal, it's just weird, especially on a rewatch.
Yeah, and the fact that the person who actually liked him most actually was his mom's maid, who became his wife.
Like I said, it gets weird.
Yeah, and the fact she's voiced by Stephanie Seif, who does not reprise her role for part 3. Did you notice that? They changed the voice actor. I'm not sure why. Where originally she had an Italian accent.
She did.
And part 3, it's not there. It's like, what happened to her Italian accent? Did she lose it when she married Joseph?
Possibly.
Yeah, and they don't like they do say after part 2 that Robbie speak he did eventually die as a bachelor, but his company continued even out without him. Okay, which they do bring his people foundation that they're actually in part 3. They play a small role in part 3. They don't play a bigger role as they did in part 2.
Yes, it's definitely a downgrade in terms of narrative. But
they did not play a role in part 4.
No. They get like a few cameos in part 3, and that's it. I don't think they're ever seen again.
Part 5, they do nothing. Part 5,
exactly.
4, it's tiny bits here and there, but not really big role. Part 6, they play a really big supporting role in that one.
Okay.
But at the part 6, we'll never see Speedwagon Foundation ever again because the manga rebooted the series with part 7.
So part 7 is considered a reboot or is it considered a spinoff?
Reboot.
Okay. But
it's a reboot of part 1.
It's a reboot of part 1. Okay, thank you for confirming that. So like I said, in terms of the 3 protagonists so far, Jonathan is pretty much your standard rising noble / tragic hero who basically the duel of the fates, for lack of a better term. Part 1 is mostly a tragedy. Part 2 is overcoming triumph. And part 3, like the name says, it's hold on. I was about to say Unbreakable Diamond. Hold on. I'm getting my subtitles mixed up.
Part 2 with Battle Tenacity.
Yes, thank you. But yes, and like I said, Joestar is my all-time favorite in terms of the mainline franchise. But Josuke is my personal favorite, but Joestar is a close second. If I were to rank them, it's Josuke, Joestar, Jonathan, and then Joseph. And like I said, the only reason I'm rating Jonathan higher than Joseph is because basically his entire characterization in part 2, the reveal of the mentor being his birth mother, and Joseph being an honest-to-God pervert. Now, granted, by the time we see him in part 3, he does grow out of it for the most part. But again,
asking, does he use Haimon, his abilities in part 2? He does for one episode.
Yes,
and it's very weak.
Yes,
because he's out of practice.
But like I said,
he does use it. You might be thinking, does he use Parma Herpo in part 4? No.
But how would you rank?
He doesn't use it. Probably because of how old he is. Though the case between part 3 and part 4, it's not big with high skibble like it was between part 1 and part 2, and part 2 and part 3. It's not 50 years. It's only 11.
Yes, because right now we're about a little over 100 years after the events of the original series.
Mm-hmm.
We're about 100 years later. Jonathan did end up dying in the ship crash. Dio ended up hijacking his body. So Jonathan died at about 32. Joseph is still alive up until part 3. I don't know if he survives canonically past part 4 or not.
I don't
Joseph,
know anything about that because they'll mention in part 6.
okay, so he's likely passed away. Josuke is, at least by the time we get to part 4, when we do cover that, Josuke is about 19 at the beginning of the series. I could be wrong.
I think he's about 17 because he's in high school.
Okay, 17. Thank you.
So I think by the time we get to part 4, he is almost 30.
Okay.
And at some point, he got married to some unnamed woman, which, by the way, the part 6 does not explain who the heck that Jolene's mother is at all. They show her, what she kind of looks like, but she's never named.
It was never confirmed who Jolene's mother is. It was never
confirmed. Yeah, and I don't know if the writer even cares to explain who the mother is.
I mean, nothing wrong with it, but it would be a nice detail to know because
yes,
the world building in JoJo is so vast and cryptic. There's only a minute details you don't really know about, like the circumstances of why the mentor gave Joseph up, or like we just mentioned a few seconds ago, who Joestar married to. I almost said Josuke, who Joestar ended up marrying. It's very minute things, but the world building is phenomenal in this series.
Yeah, part 1 does not have spinoffs. Part 2 does. Has one light novel which focuses on Jonathan's son George.
So it's so it's Jonathan, then George, because his wife does give birth to George shortly after the events of the sunken ship. So yes, did George end up having children, or he just ended up branching off from the main family?
George basically got with Lisa, who was adopted by one of the guys from part 1 who became a vampire.
Okay, so George, I always thought there was a second child with Jonathan. Excuse me, but so George is the father of Joseph. George is the father of Joseph. Okay.
Yeah, I think they explained in part 2 that he was killed by one of Dio's zombies.
Okay.
Yes, the book I never read it because for some reason Viz Media has never gotten a license to release it here. Because the only language is published it's published in Japanese, obviously, and it's also published in Italian, but not English. I would think JoJo is still kind of popular with people that Viz Media would, release it here. Nope, they haven't.
You also got to factor distribution and licensing fees.
Yes. Excuse me. Part 3 kind of does have a spinoff. There's a light novel that focuses on Whole Horse. What he was doing after this part wrapped up. But it's more basically the spinoff stuff comes with part 4 than does any other part of the franchise.
Yes.
Which I think maybe because part 4 was very popular, it basically is the most well-developed story out of all the parts.
That's why I said part 4 is my personal favorite. It's very thought out. The world building is fantastic.
And plus, it's all focused in one town. They're not globetrotting. Like, if you think about it, do they ever leave town the whole story? No.
Unless we're counting a filler episode, but not that I recall.
Yeah. And the things with part 4 and part 5, those two have the same exact amount of episodes, which is 39. Part 6 has only 38. Now, when I was watching this part, originally was bench watches back in late 2017, the dub was not finished yet because dub was still coming out. Eventually, they go back and watch this whole thing again. I picked up where I left off for this part. Where I left off, I think it was like towards the end of part 1 of this story. The first half of the season, I went basically into part 3. The second half of the season, then I watched part 4, which was never dubbed at that point. It was dubbed later on. This takes a bit longer to release the dub than Crunchyroll does. You ever notice that?
I have noticed that.
The worst is Aniplex America. They take 2 months after first episode comes out before they release the dub. An example of this, the first season aired last year for Blue Exorcist. They waited about 2 months after the season was released to finally come out. They did see Marsh Magic Muscles. They waited 2 months after the first episode came out, finally releasing the first episode dubbed. Don't know the reason for this.
Wait, didn't they do this for? Didn't Aniplex do the same thing for Sword Art Online, or was that a separate? Was that a separate direct creative team?
I think it may be them too. I think the ones that I still have never seen Sword Art Online. I've read a couple of light novels, was in the manga, but I haven't watched the series yet.
Yeah, fair to the faint of heart. I at least for season 1, I recommend the SAO Bridge better. It trims a lot of the fat, and there are a lot of good jokes in there. But yeah, season 1 of SAO, I'm not going to say it falls off. It just gets a little all over the place in terms of structure.
Yeah, and I know that also the main character's coat was actually a little fun fact. Kenny Omega wore his coat for his entrance when he battled Chris Jericho in their second match at Double Nothing 2019.
I remember that match.
I thought it was a very interesting choice. As far as I can tell, he only came across him like maybe a couple other times. Like at one point, dressed up as a Terminator, but the only time I can think he came with a costume was he came with a match with the Holiday of Dynamite, where he dressed up as a robot for a tag match. That was also late 2019 as well. But I've never seen somebody else. The only person I know who actually loves cosplaying, Mercedes Monet. She loves cosplaying. One of the Rumbles, she cosplayed as Sailor Moon. I always like it when the wrestlers cosplay. It's always fun.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a good time for everyone involved. But now I think we're going to segue into final thoughts. But final thoughts for me, JoJo Bizarre Adventure Part 3. It's decent for what it is. It's definitely an improvement from Part 2 because there's a lot of cringe humor in Part 2, at least in my opinion. So that's definitely a step up. But the story, it's a good. I will argue Part 4 is better in terms of story because you don't have all the globetrotting. But this is a solid season. I
would say the best thing about the season is the action, the dialogue.
Yes, action.
Over the top. I think of all 6 parts, this is the most glorious of all of them.
That is my one complaint for season 3. It is definitely the goriest out of the main line.
Because people getting limbs chopped off, heads chopped off in here, blood everywhere. It's the most bloodiest part, but it's a good story.
So if you could stomach it,
heck, there's even a satisfying ending. At least you have the villain be shoved into space, like it was in Part 2. Like that's how you defeat the Snowmen, by shoving to outer space. Okay. Probably by far some might think it's quite lame, but it's actually one of the more cooler ways to be a villain. And he's still up there because he's never come back because he's frozen in space. He never came back down. I'm like, wait, he's still up in orbit despite the fact that all the reboot happening?
Yep.
And he's never mentioned, like, it's almost like when we think of Part 2, it's like they just ignore Part 2 when it comes to your stories. Like, Part 1 is still very influential for the main story. It's like Part 2 has no major consequences when it comes to the major story as a whole. Aside from the fact that it basically expands upon a plot point from Part 1 via the stone mask that they found, that was found by Jonathan's father prior to Part 1.
Oh, almost dropped this. But yeah, not really a whole lot of much is known about George's personal life outside of, when he was a baby and the lead up to his death at the hands of one of Dio's zombies. Not too much is known about George.
I think he did marry Lisa.
He did. But
and then she became a widow because of his death at the hand of a zombie who actually was his superior officer. Yes. But if you notice, it comes to part 3, there's no mention of George at all. None.
I mean,
no mention of George, Lisa. It's like, okay, we bring back Joseph and Susie Q, but all those really cool characters we had in Part 2, none are brought back. The only ones confirmed that did die was Elena and Ario Speedwagon.
Elena died of old age in the
Yes.
In the 50-year time skip. So Elena was confirmed to die of old age. As for Speedwagon, Was he confirmed natural causes as well, or was he unalived?
Natural causes. They mentioned. Oh, he said he was a lifelong bachelor. I remember there was a joke by Joseph implying the fact that Speedwagon had a thing for Elena, but it never went anywhere at all. And of course, Speedwagon is like, "Oh, knock it off." It's like, he's like, we're just friends. There's nothing going between us. I think because that's his best friend's wife. So he's like, nope, not gonna touch that.
Off limits.
Yeah. And the thing with one thing I've never understood about Jonathan. So he lost his house. Okay. They say he lost his fortune. I'm like, because basically eventually he's like destitute because he lost his home. Like, okay, but I'm sure he has money in the bank in London. So I didn't get why that dialogue said that in part 1.
Now, are we referring to Jonathan or are we referring to Joseph? Because Jonathan does end up dying and then being anchored by Dio at the event when the ship sinks.
Jonathan.
Okay. So, yeah, it was a whole thing. Dio, God, we went over part 1 like over a year ago. I could barely remember it.
Yeah, because I remember that because when they brought in those people to help out with after Zeppelin died. Like, you watch the story, these guys feel like they're very inconsequential. They're very last-minute additions. Now, of course, it's one of those cases where it's actually the manga's fault for this, it's not the production for this, so it's not their fault for this. And before this anime first started back in 2012, there was an adaptation of part 1 as a movie. And apparently the reception was pretty bad. The creator hated it. His prime reason for hating it was because Speedwagon was not in the movie. Though it's made by the same people who made the OVA series for the made Starscream's OVA series in the 90s. But none of the fact, it seems like you watch this like, oh, they come on like basically like really quick. But after part 4, this day production takes big for a couple of years before they do Golden Wind.
Yep.
I guess because they basically they were like, it's not the case of they're burning manga, they're going to manga quickly. That's not the case. They adapted 4 straight parts, and I'm sure it's probably because the team needed a break.
Likely.
Yes. But Stars and Clears like also have really good music. I love the music from Stars and Clears. Like in the second half of the show, the ending credit song was Walk Like an Egyptian because of Egypt. And I love the open theme song is awesome this one. Like part 1 is really good. I think all the theme songs for all 3 parts are really good.
Yeah, I mean that was never a fault of the animation team with the music scores, the references. Jojo Bizarre Adventure is a little zany. It gets a little all over the place at times, but trust me, it's worth it.
Yes, and plus there's tons of 80s music in this one. That's why it's so good.
But if you had to rank, how would you rank the seasons we've covered, or parts we've covered in worst to best?
I would say I would put part 2 below part 3 because it felt as though the major story was. It felt like you finished part 2. It's like, okay, it has an okay ending. It's like you would think that we follow up with it in like later parts, but no.
Nope.
Part 1 gets followed up a lot, but not part 2.
Yeah, part 2 feels like, I'm not going to say it's outright a standalone, but it's just the resolution is weak. The resolution in part 2 is very weak, at least in my opinion.
And felt like a lot of stuff was very forced. And that could be because the writer, the creator was probably on a deadline.
Yep.
But if you look at Star Wars, this felt like was very thought out, really very well planned. Didn't feel like it was a rush story, had a proper conclusion to it. a good start, middle, and end. It felt like basically like he took like the good stuff he did with Bit of Blood and put it into Stars and Crusaders.
And like I said, Diamond Unbreakable. Diamond Unbreakable is considered the fan favorite season or part.
Mm-hmm.
Part 4, Unbreakable Diamond, is considered the fan favorite.
Yes,
But,
and I think we should also, when we talk about, we need to talk about the voice actor for the show, the lead one.
But by all means, Nick, whenever you're ready.
Yes, for part 4, the lead voice actor passed away a couple years ago, Billy Kemitz, who was absolutely amazing as the character. He's actually the only one of all the protagonists who's no longer alive. Of course, it's one of the few characters I'm playing. He's only playing this character, the lead character of Rise of Hero, and also, people don't bring this one up. He was also a supporting character in the series Welcome to Demon Skull Irmakun. He was the character, the guy who wore the pink suit in the show. Well, it was the main character's like best friend, a really tall, skinny guy.
Oh yeah, I know. I forget his name, but I know who you're talking about. Yeah, he did end up getting recast for season 3 after he passed.
Yeah, it was Stephen Fu, who replaced him in the Registered Hero. Who replaced him as lead character in that one.
Yep.
Which made sense.
Makes sense.
And that one has been confirmed for season 4. Do not know when it's coming out, but I'm happy I got season 4. Especially season 3 felt like a very much improvement from season 2. Season 2, its biggest problem was stuff was stepped out of order.
Yeah, that was his biggest. I agree.
And you watch season 3, it's like the director saying, "We are sorry for the mess up of season 2." It's like the whole thing of season 3 is basically their apology for season 2.
So yes, stay tuned. Now, Nick? Do you want us to take a break from JoJo Bizarre Adventure and move on to another anime as kind of like a palate cleanser, or just keep going until we catch up?
We can take a break after part 4.
We can take a break after part 4. Okay, so stay tuned for that. Also, we will announce either via Twitter or X or from my community post the Boruto Chapter 18 review. We're hopefully, if scheduling permits, we can get that out. We can collab on that within the next couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. With that being said, Nick, anything you want to promote or you got come up on your channel before we go?
Well, I have some anime reviews coming up. I'm gonna be hoping to start a new anime tomorrow. It's Why Does No One Remember Me in This World? It's the anime where we have the story is that the main character wins the war and then he gets raised into existence, and the new character has to the main character has to basically take his place. And I've heard a lot of comparisons between this one and the show of Freya, like very similar between the two shows. So I would think that this one has more similarities with that one than that one. And plus, it was just announced recently that the show for this one is finally getting a dub.
Nice.
After the finale came, it was about 4 or 5 months ago, and now we're getting a dub already? Like, why couldn't Crunchyroll do it sooner? Yeah, and apparently Lindsay Seidel is part of the cast.
Nice.
Yeah, and did you watch this anime?
I've heard of it. I have not seen it, but I have heard of it.
I have seen it. I kind of enjoyed it. The only problem I have with this, because people's biggest problem with the show was the pacing. That's the only problem with the show. I did not think that was the issue. The issue was the CGI. They use CGI at the wrong moments, like for walking, for a scene where the two leads are having a conversation in a bed in a hotel room, and by the time the season ends, it ends on a cliffhanger that leaves open for season 2, but haven't heard anything about season 2. It just have the only similarities between this one and Freya is that we have a high school class that transports to another world, except they replaced the film teacher. It wasn't Freya with a gym teacher who disappears in the first episode. In what I've read, he is not dead. He just just not there.
Hmm.
And the main villain is an evil goddess who you look at her as like, wow, what a beautiful woman! Like what great outfit she's wearing. No, that's actually her skin.
Hmm.
It was explained in book 8 for some reason when she tried to get stabbed at one of the characters, and it turns out no, it was actually part of her body. She just wears that way to cover up her naughty bits.
Hmm.
And
But
this weird lesbian fetish in the show. It's a weird thing. I'm not going to explain it here. I'll mention to you off screen what exactly goes on with this one because it is so weird.
yeah, that's probably better for a private conversation. But with all that being said, as for me, stay tuned for. With that being said, please, some Mass Effect and Mass Effect Andromeda, Mass Effect. I just finished the original trilogy. If you want to check that out. Also, some Dragon Age playthrough. I recently started that again. And Nick, I don't know if you've heard about this one. This new anime I was watching. It involves a Sentai parody. Well, excuse me, a Sentai character getting isekai. It recently came out. Have you heard of this one?
The Red Ranger's Adventure into the World. I've been watching and reviewing on my YouTube channel.
Oh, how about that? Cheap plug. But yeah,
It's the in the sub, her Rangers are actual Sentai actors. Like Blue is Mega Blue from Mega Ranger.
okay, from Mega. Okay,
Pink is Yellow Buster from Go Busters.
okay,
The Yellow Ranger is Deca Pink
from Deca Ranger.
Yes.
Her I recognized.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised they kind of swapped colors with these two, which that was kind of funny because this one I played red, and the green one, he's also Blue Ranger too. I think he's actually the guy who wasn't Time Ranger. He was Blue Ranger. I was kind of surprised by that. And then they announced, oh, we're getting a dub. Except I was really hoping they might cast some actual Power Ranger actors to play these characters. Nope, they ever go anime voice actors. Like, I had to look up because basically it's what's it I can find it here?
Take your time.
Because let's see here. Here we go. Because they just announced recently the dub for it because here it is right here. Okay, so Red is voiced by Ethan Coden.
Okay.
Yahandra, she's the sorceress. Natalie Van Sistine. I'm not really familiar with her. Poseidon, that's the butler. His voice actor I'm very familiar with. It's Bruce Elliott, who voiced Makarov from Fairy Tail. Character known as the Breakup King is voiced by Chris George, who I've met. The morphing voice is Daniel Van Thomas. We have Landon McDowell. He voices the Blue Range, that one. Castel Perez versus Pink. Crystal Laporte voices Yellow. Zan Kramer voices Green. That's pretty much your English dub cast for the show. So what do you think of that dub cast for
Not bad. Not bad, but actually having a former Power Ranger actor, even if it's just a supporting role, it would have been a nice touch.
Yeah, I don't get like, okay, so the one person who is a former Ranger who could basically fill in these roles, Johnny Abash. He's a former Ranger, and he's a voice actor too. So I don't get why they couldn't contact him to play one of these characters.
Like I kind of understand why, but yeah, I just would have preferred it.
Oh, I've also seen that the guy you remember the Lone Wolf Ranger from Wild Force?
Cole Evans?
No, the Wolf Ranger.
Oh, I forget his actor name.
Merrick.
I know who Merrick.
Yeah, he has a YouTube channel. And he reacted to the first episode. I was kind of surprised the fact he even had one, because I noticed that some people who I've heard of actually YouTube channels recently, like apparently, get this, Devon Dudley has a YouTube channel.
Divatox?
No, Devon Dudley.
Devon
One
Dudley.
half of Dudley Boys.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he works with, like, some of the days where he works with Maven, who has his own YouTube channel, which his one on almost 2 years. And he has 500,000 subs. He has like 500,000 subs right now. And he's interesting. Let's do all the behind the scenes stuff. He also did a video with Jinder Mahal, The Undertaker, Steve Richards, which Stevie's got a podcast now. Which, that's an interesting choice. I'm sure he got some good stories. One person really wished to continue his podcast, but I heard the reason why I had to end it because of technical problems. Shane Douglas. And I put a question on his podcast of, how did he get the name of the franchise? He kind of explained it was Paul Heyman's idea. And apparently his co-host did not know the story at all. So I'm like, the show is called Franchise University. You have the franchise Shane Douglas. Why not ask him the origin story of how he got the nickname? And why not? It's the only question I ever asked him. And it was quite interesting. I love his podcast where he had it. Like, he talked about the mass transit incident for ECW, sometime with WCW, a little bit of stuff here and there, but he's a fascinating guy to listen to, Shane Douglas.
Indeed. But that's where we're pretty much going to call it, because otherwise we'd be at this all night.
Yep.
Thanks again, Nick, coming on to the show. You're always a valued guest. Thank you all of you for staying up late with us to cover this topic.
Yeah, it's only like 11 o'clock my time.
Please like, comment, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Flame off.